Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump wants to be a king. It's the best explanation for everything he's been doing just in recent days. Just look at what he's doing right now to the White House. That is, of course, the people's house. It's our house as Americans, as citizens. There it is. The residence of every president since John Adams in 1800.
We are going to make and build a ballroom, which they've wanted for probably 100 years at the White House. And it'll be a world-class, beautiful ballroom.
For 150 years, presidents, administrations, and White House staff have longed for a large event space on the White House complex.
You hear that sound? Oh, that's music to my ears. I love that sound. Other people don't like it. I love it, Josh. I think when I hear that sound, it...
Okay, so here's something wild. The Supreme Court just dropped what might be the biggest nuclear bomb on Trump's presidency we've seen in like modern history. And I'm not being dramatic here. This is actually insane. We're talking about a 7-2 ruling that basically just said, yeah, no, you can't do that to over 30 of Trump's executive orders. Over 30, just gone, wiped out, done. And here's the kicker. Some of the justices who voted against him, his own appointees. Yeah, you heard that right. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh. The people Trump put on the bench, they looked at what he was doing and said, this is unconstitutional. Can you believe this? The very justices he bragged about appointing are now the ones helping to tear down his executive power structure. But wait, it gets better or worse, depending on how you look at it. This isn't just about some paperwork getting tossed out. We're watching Trump's cabinet literally collapse in real time. People are resigning. Senior aides are scrambling. There's infighting, panic, and what insiders are calling a total death spiral of talent leaving the White House. It's chaos, pure chaos, and the media is calling this the biggest judicial check on presidential power since Nixon and the tape scandal. Let that sink in for a second. We're talking Watergate-level constitutional crisis here. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
And this is just one small but very illustrative example that absolutely pales next to Trump's most kingly urges, like, for instance, and this is not hyperbolic, the urge to kill anyone he wants, anywhere, anytime.
President Trump also shared video of the strike on the submarine that he says was carrying a large amount of fentanyl. He said the attack killed 2 people on board the vessel, while 2 others survived. This was at least the 5th strike the Trump administration has carried out in international waters against alleged drug traffickers. Critics have argued the strikes are illegal and circumvent due process law.
The Supreme Court just told the President of the United States that he massively, and I mean massively, overstepped his authority on immigration, on deploying the National Guard, on firing independent officials who wouldn't kiss the ring. All of it just struck down. So what does this mean? Well, for starters, Congress is going absolutely nuclear. They're talking impeachment. They're demanding resignations of the entire administration, not just Trump, but everyone around him. Cabinet members are facing legal scrutiny, congressional investigations, and the very real possibility of prosecution. This is not a drill. This is happening right now as we speak. In Trump's response, radio silence from the man himself, but his loyalists are in full damage control mode. They're spinning, they're deflecting, they're trying to figure out how to explain to their base that the Supreme Court, the conservative Supreme Court, just dismantled their entire legal strategy for governing. It's not going well, let me tell you. Here's what really gets me though. This ruling doesn't just affect Trump. It resets the entire definition of presidential power. It's a massive pivot in how the executive branch can operate. The courts and Congress are now fully mobilized to check and reshape what a president can and cannot do. This is historic. This is government textbook rewrite level stuff happening in real time. And you know what's crazy? Most people don't even understand what just happened. They see the headlines, they see Supreme Court rules against Trump, and they move on. But this is so much bigger than that. This is about whether a president can bypass Congress, declare emergencies whenever it's convenient, use military force domestically, and fire anyone who disagrees with him. The Supreme Court just said no to all of it. So Trump's left with what? A skeleton crew of yes men and loyalists who are probably updating their resumes as we speak. The talent's gone. The legal foundation is crumbling. And now he's facing the very real possibility that his own cabinet members might start cooperating with investigators just to save themselves. It's every man for himself at this point. And the timing? Come on. The timing couldn't be worse for Trump. Just when he thought he had consolidated power, just when he thought his appointees would protect him, The whole thing comes crashing down. Over 30 executive orders, the backbone of his entire agenda, just invalidated. His immigration crackdowns, blocked. His law and order initiatives, dead in the water. His emergency border policies, the Supreme Court said absolutely not. This is the kind of moment that defines a presidency, and right now it's defining Trump's as one that pushed too far, grabbed too much power, and got smacked down hard by the very institution he thought he controlled. The Supreme Court just reminded everyone that there are still checks and balances in this country, and they're not afraid to use them. So buckle up, because what comes next is going to be wild. We've got cabinet members fleeing, Congress circling like sharks, and a president who just lost the legal justification for basically everything he's been doing. This is the Supreme Court nuke verdict that's reshaping American government overnight, and we're going to break down every single piece of it. Trust me when I say this, what we're witnessing right now is going to be in history books for generations to come. Alright, so let's dig into what actually happened here, because this is where things get really interesting. The Supreme Court didn't just wake up one day and decide to nuke Trump's presidency for fun. This ruling is the result of multiple legal challenges that have been building for months, maybe even longer, challenging the administration's use of executive power. And here's what most people are missing. This isn't about politics. This is about constitutional law. The Supreme Court looked at over 30 executive orders and said these violate the separation of powers. They said Trump was trying to bypass Congress on major policy issues. They said he was abusing emergency powers. They said he was overreaching on using the National Guard for law enforcement. And they shut it all down. Now, let me explain why this is such a massive deal. When a president issues an executive order, they're supposed to be acting within the authority given to them by the Constitution and by Congress. They're not supposed to just make up new laws or bypass the legislative process because it's more convenient. But that's exactly what the Supreme Court says Trump was doing. He was treating executive orders like they were legislation, pushing through massive policy changes without congressional approval. And the immigration stuff? Oh man, this is where it gets really messy. Trump's entire border strategy was built on executive orders, the emergency declarations, the funding redirections, the deployment of federal forces. All of it was done through executive action. And the Supreme Court just said, that's not how this works. You can't declare a national emergency just to get around Congress not giving you what you want. You can't redirect military funding without authorization. You can't deploy the National Guard as a federal police force. So what happens now to all those policies? They're done, finished. The legal foundation is gone. And everyone who was implementing these policies, cabinet members, agency heads, military officials, they're all exposed. Because if the policies were unconstitutional, then the people carrying them out might be liable. That's why we're seeing resignations. That's why people are lawyering up. That's why there's panic. But here's where it gets even crazier. The ruling also addressed Trump's attempts to fire independent officials. You know, the inspectors general, the agency watchdogs, the people whose entire job is to provide oversight and make sure the administration follows the law. Trump wanted them gone because they were investigating him, reporting on misconduct, blocking illegal actions, and he tried to fire them. The Supreme Court said, nope, you can't do that either. These positions exist specifically to be independent from presidential pressure. This is a fundamental principle of American government. You need people who can check executive power without fear of being fired for doing their jobs. And let's talk about Trump's own appointees turning on him. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh voting against him. This is huge. These are conservative justices. These are people Trump specifically chose because he thought they'd be loyal. But they looked at the evidence, they looked at the law, and they said this is unconstitutional. That tells you how serious the violations were. When your own appointees are voting against you 7-2, that's not a close call. That's a landslide. That's the Supreme Court sending a message that what happened here was so far outside the bounds of acceptable presidential conduct that even ideological allies couldn't support it. The comparison to the Nixon tapes case is really telling too. That was the moment when the Supreme Court told a president, you're not above the law. And we're seeing the same thing here. The court is drawing a line and saying presidential power has limits. You can't just do whatever you want because you're the president. There are constitutional boundaries, and Trump blew past them. He didn't just cross the line. He sprinted past it and kept going. Now, Congress is having a field day with this. They've been investigating Trump's administration for months, trying to build cases for impeachment, trying to hold people accountable, and now the Supreme Court just handed them everything they need on a silver platter. The court literally said these actions exceeded constitutional authority. That's grounds for impeachment right there. That's grounds for removal. That's grounds for prosecution. And we're seeing the fallout happen in real time. Reports are coming out about cabinet members who are signaling willingness to cooperate with investigators. That's code for they're ready to flip. They're ready to testify against the administration to save themselves. Because if the ship is sinking, and it is, nobody wants to go down with it. They're looking at potential criminal charges congressional subpoenas, career destruction, and they're making calculations about survival. When you're facing the possibility of going to prison or losing everything you've worked for, loyalty to the president starts to look a lot less appealing. The White House is apparently in full crisis mode, meetings behind closed doors, frantic calls to lawyers, trying to figure out how to respond to a Supreme Court decision that basically invalidates their entire governing strategy. And what can they say? They can't attack the Supreme Court as too liberal. Trump appointed 3 of them. They can't say the ruling is political. It was 7-2. They're stuck trying to spin a devastating loss as somehow not that bad. Meanwhile, Trump's loyalists are disappearing. The people who stuck around through everything else are looking at this ruling and thinking this is too much. Because it's one thing to defend controversial policies, it's another thing entirely to defend policies that the Supreme Court just declared unconstitutional. That's not spinnable. That's not something you can talk your way out of. The highest court in the land just said this is illegal. And let's talk about what this means for Trump's remaining agenda. Everything he wants to do now has to go through proper channels. He can't just issue executive orders and hope they stick. He needs congressional approval. He needs to follow the law. He needs to work within the system. And for someone who's built their entire presidency on unilateral action and executive power, that's a death sentence for their agenda. Think about it. Trump's whole approach to governing has been about doing things his way without having to negotiate or compromise. Now the Supreme Court is saying you have to play by the rules like everyone else. That's a fundamental shift in how this administration can operate. The National Guard issue is particularly explosive. Trump wanted to deploy them for immigration enforcement, for law enforcement in cities, basically as a federal police force. The Supreme Court said absolutely not. That's not what the National Guard is for. That exceeds presidential authority. And now all those deployments that were planned, they're blocked. The resources that were allocated, they can't be used. The entire strategy, gone. This was supposed to be a cornerstone of Trump's domestic policy, and it just evaporated overnight. And here's something most people aren't talking about. This ruling has implications way beyond Trump. It sets precedent for what future presidents can and cannot do. It reinforces the separation of powers. It reminds everyone that Congress has authority that the president can't just steamroll over. This is a reset button on executive power that will affect American government for decades. Future presidents, Democrat or Republican, will have to operate within the boundaries this ruling establishes. But right now, in this moment, it's Trump who's dealing with the immediate consequences. His cabinet collapsing. His policies invalidated. His legal strategy in shambles. His own appointees voting against him. Congress calling for impeachment. Investigators circling. And a Supreme Court decision that will be studied in law schools as one of the most significant checks on presidential power in modern history. Legal scholars are already calling this a landmark case that redefines the limits of executive authority. So when people ask, is this really that big of a deal? Yeah, it really is. This is government reshaping, presidency defining, constitution reinforcing, level serious, and we're watching it unfold in real time. This is the kind of moment that changes the trajectory of American politics and governance for years to come. Okay, so let's break this down into what actually matters going forward, because there's a lot to unpack here, and we need to understand where things go from this point. First thing, the immediate impact. Over 30 executive orders are now invalid. Just poof, gone. And these weren't small orders about like National Pancake Day or whatever. These were the foundation of Trump's entire policy agenda. Immigration enforcement, done. Border emergency declarations, dead. National Guard deployments, blocked. Agency firings, reversed. This is everything Trump was banking on to govern without congressional approval, and it's all been stripped away. So what happens to the policies that were already implemented under these orders? That's where things get complicated. Some actions can be reversed, some can't. People who were deported under these policies, they're not coming back automatically. Money that was spent, it's already spent. But going forward, everything changes. The administration can't keep doing what it was doing. They have to completely restructure their approach. And that means going to Congress, negotiating, compromising, all the things Trump has shown he's terrible at doing. And the cabinet situation, oh man, this is wild. We're not just talking about 1 or 2 people resigning. We're talking about a mass exodus. Senior officials who see the writing on the wall and want to get out before they're dragged into investigations. Mid-level staffers who don't want their careers destroyed by association. Even loyalists who are starting to question whether staying is worth the legal risk. When you've got people who've defended Trump through everything else suddenly looking for the exits, you know the situation is bad. The reports about people signaling willingness to cooperate with investigators, that's huge. That means cabinet members and senior aides are considering testifying against the administration. They're considering turning over documents. They're considering becoming witnesses in potential impeachment proceedings or criminal investigations, because when the Supreme Court declares your actions unconstitutional, that changes the calculation real fast. Suddenly, you're not defending bold policy decisions, you're defending illegal actions, and that's a very different thing. Congress is absolutely going to run with this. They've got committees lined up, ready to investigate. They've got subpoenas ready to go. They've got impeachment articles being drafted as we speak. And now they've got a Supreme Court ruling backing them up. They can point to this decision and say, see, the court agrees with us. These actions were illegal. That's powerful ammunition for anyone who wants to hold the administration accountable. You can bet every Democratic member of Congress is going to be citing this ruling in every hearing, every press conference, every floor speech from now until the next election. In the political fallout, this is going to define Trump's presidency. This is the moment historians will point to, not just because of the ruling itself, but because of what it represents. It represents the limits of presidential power. It represents the system pushing back. It represents checks and balances actually working, even when one party controls multiple branches of government. This is proof that the constitutional system can still function, even in highly partisan times. But here's what really matters for regular people. This ruling affects actual policies that impact real lives, immigration enforcement changes that affects millions of families, National Guard deployments that affects communities, agency oversight that affects how government actually functions. This isn't abstract constitutional theory. This is about how power is used and who it affects. When we talk about executive overreach, we're talking about real people whose lives are impacted by these decisions. The fact that Trump appointed justices voted against him, we need to talk about what that means. It means even judges who share his judicial philosophy looked at what he was doing and said this crosses the line. It means the violations were so clear, so obvious, that they couldn't justify them even if they wanted to. And it means Trump can't claim this is just liberal judges being political. His own people turned on him. The judges he put on the bench to protect his agenda are the ones helping to tear it down. That's gotta sting. Now, what does Trump do from here? He's got limited options. He can try to work with Congress, but that requires compromise, and he's never been good at that. He can try to issue new, narrower executive orders that might pass constitutional muster, but those won't accomplish what he wants. Or he can just thrash around, attack the courts, attack Congress, attack his own appointees, and watch his presidency implode. My guess is going to be door number 3, because everything we've seen from Trump suggests he doesn't back down, he doesn't compromise, and he doesn't accept limits on his power. So we're probably heading into a full-blown constitutional crisis where Trump tries to ignore the ruling, Congress moves toward impeachment, and the courts have to step in again. It's going to be a mess. In his base, how do they react to this? That's the big question. Do they see this as the system being rigged against Trump? Or do they start to question whether maybe, just maybe, he actually did overstep? Because when the Supreme Court, the conservative Supreme Court, rules against you 7-2, that's pretty hard to spin as persecution. Even the most loyal Trump supporters have to look at this and wonder if maybe there's something to it. The resignation wave is only going to accelerate. Nobody wants to be the last person standing when the ship goes down. Nobody wants to be the one left holding the bag when investigators come calling. So we're going to see more departures, more people suddenly discovering they want to spend more time with family or pursue other opportunities or whatever excuse sounds good. Watch for the announcements. They're coming. And the quality of people willing to work for Trump now is going to drop even further. Because who wants to join an administration that's under this much legal scrutiny, with this much chaos, with a Supreme Court decision hanging over everything? Only the true believers, the ones who are either too loyal or too desperate to care about the risks. The best and brightest aren't going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Here's the bottom line. This Supreme Court decision just reset American government. It reminded everyone that presidential power has limits. It showed that checks and balances still work. And it exposed Trump's entire governing strategy as constitutionally bankrupt. The cabinet's collapsing, Congress is mobilizing, and we're watching a presidency crumble under the weight of its own overreach. What comes next? More investigations, probably impeachment proceedings, definitely more chaos, more resignations, more infighting, and a president who's increasingly isolated, increasingly desperate, and increasingly running out of options. This is the kind of moment that changes everything. The Supreme Court just drew a line in the sand and said this far, no further. And Trump's standing on the wrong side of that line, with nowhere to go. His policies are blocked, his cabinet's fleeing, his legal foundation is destroyed, and the walls are closing in. Every day that passes, the situation gets worse for him. More people leave, more evidence comes out, more pressure builds. So yeah, this is the Supreme Court nuke verdict that everyone's going to be talking about for years. This is the moment when the system pushed back hard against executive overreach, and this is just the beginning of what's going to be an absolutely wild ride going forward. Because if you thought things were chaotic before, just wait. We haven't seen anything yet. The next few weeks and months are going to be absolutely insane as all of this plays out. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. And trust me, what happens next is going to be even crazier than what we've already seen. The constitutional crisis is just getting started, and nobody knows exactly how it's going to end. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be historic. This is the kind of stuff people will be studying and debating for decades, and we're living through it right now.